Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, continuing our Big Ten previews as we hit number 12 in Rod's list, the Indiana Hoosiers. Before we start, a quick word of thanks from us to Jim Rainey, who became a new paid supporter on Substack. Thanks a lot, Jim. In addition to being recognized as an all-around great guy, Jim also gets access to our episodes ad-free and sometimes early. So if you'd like to get those benefits and support the show, head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the necessary links. Okay, Rod, let's talk about your favorite team, Indiana, the team that you always predict to do really well, and yet you expect to say they won't do well. you, I think 2 years ago you said they're going to be number one, but you didn't think they'd be first in the Big Ten. And so the
And they
Mike Woodson,
weren't.
they were, yeah, you were both right and wrong at the same time, I
Right.
guess. And so again, this is Mike Woodson's sort of bizarre ride in Indiana. What is three? Was it three? Just 3 seasons or four? Maybe it was four. Maybe he got his fourth, and we didn't expect that.
Yeah.
So strange. He came from the pro ranks, obviously Indiana alum, and had a unremarkable career. Let's say stint in Indiana. I think made the tournament maybe once out of those years. Finished last year, despite having a lot of portal additions and a lot of big names. Only finished 19 and 13, 10 and 10 in the league. Ended up stepping down before the season ended, pretty much, because he's getting up there in age, and also I think it was pretty clear that he wasn't wanted anymore in Bloomington. And so he stepped down, and they actually kind of played okay for a while. But Indiana has been in the coaching desert since Bobby Knight left in the '90s. I can't remember how long it's been. It's been a long
No,
time.
he just barely got into this
So
century.
2000. So it's been 25 plus years
Yeah.
since they've had Bobby Knight in the sidelines, throwing chairs and wearing a sweater. And they've had a couple times that they made a title game in 2002. They made a couple Sweet 16s, or I guess
One.
one, just one,
One.
with Tom Crean, with Victor Oladipo, right?
Yep. It was that
But
crew.
it has been a while, and this team, this program, despite having all the support, the fanaticism of the fans, it just has not. It has gone, I guess you could say, sideways for a long time. I mean, they've never been terrible, but they've really not been good. I think aside from that, a couple years, like I mentioned, '02 and with Crean, and I don't know. I mean, what are your well? I guess this is sort of, I know that every nightmare scenario for Michigan State fans when they see the end of Tom Izzo coming at some point. We don't, not saying it's soon, but it's sooner than before. And that
Absolutely.
this is what you don't want to have happen, and why everyone kind
Absolutely.
of freaks out about it. And I don't know if I don't know what we talked about this plenty of times. What it is about Indiana that's sort of led them down this road. Why they just continually to have this, you know, a sideways, I guess you'd say, sideways sort of trajectory, despite having what you'd say really all the everything in their favor.
Yeah. It's difficult to answer that succinctly because I think it's a lot of things. Um, and just to detour for a second, you're 100% right as to what Michigan State fans should be concerned about because you and I are old enough to know this. If you're 40,
Yeah,
which is not young, but if you're 40, you really don't have a firm grasp of
yeah,
what
because you were
Indiana
10 when
basketball
Tom Izzo took
was.
over. Yeah, right.
Well, I'm talking about Indiana. You don't have a firm grasp of
Oh,
what
yeah, that too.
Indiana
Yeah,
was. Indiana, for all but say the last 4 or 5 years of Bob Knight's tenure, was the gold standard in the Big Ten,
mm-hmm.
and right there with, I'd say right there during that period, the period he was head coach, they were right there with North Carolina. Uh,
That's before
Duke
Duke, really.
Duke didn't right. Duke didn't really ascend to where they are now until they were getting there, but they were not what they are now when Knight's tenure started to ebb at
Right.
the end. It was Indiana and North Carolina. And the man won three national titles, I think, in his first 17 years
Yeah.
at IU, something like that. Maybe it was even less than that. Might have been like first 15 years. And he did it with three different teams. It wasn't like one of these back-to-back deals, and he got two of them with largely the same cast of characters. He did it with three entirely distinct groups. They were good when he had a ton of talent. They were still good when he had less talent. And there were
Yep.
years where he sound like anybody you know. Um, it it would have been if you would have told me in 1995 that Indiana would spend the next 30 years basically in the basketball wilderness, I would not have believed it was possible.
Yeah.
And that's
You,
for
yeah.
two
Right.
reasons. One, because Bob Knight was still there, but two, and this gets at why this all matters, because basketball as a sport generally, college basketball being a big part of that, matters in the state of Indiana in a way that it doesn't anywhere else in the country. I've said this many times on this podcast. If you don't believe me, go to the state of Indiana and spend some time looking at the high school gyms in that state. Like my high school had a 4,000 seat gym, 4,000 capacity. At least it was once 4,000. I'm not sure if they still count it that way. But it was a big gym. That's nothing in the state of Indiana. That doesn't even
Hmm.
get mentioned. The passion for the sport is huge, and its flagship school that for a good period of time was as good as any program in the country is going to create a level of expectation, of interest, of all of that, right? And
Hmm.
so I actually think you could maybe make an argument that's been part of the problem. um, when Knight went, they didn't have a transition worked out the way that you would want. What you
Yeah. It
would have
certainly didn't happen
wanted,
the way they wanted. Yeah.
right? What you would have wanted was for Bob Knight to anoint his successor, and it would not have been Mike Davis. I'm telling you that. Now, Mike Davis is actually the most accomplished coach since Knight because he took
Right.
them to a national title game appearance, which was kind of fluky. That team was okay. They were not great. They got hot kind of at the right time. That was not a great team. The best Indiana team since Knight was that Sweet 16 year in 2013 under Tom Crane. And it looked like Tom Crane was going to be the guy
Yeah.
to turn this around, right? And
Hmm.
then he couldn't figure out how to get his teams to defend. He went away from using the state of Indiana as the bedrock of assembling his roster, and I think he paid a price for that. And it all just kind of slipped away. But you look at the guys they've had. So you had Mike Davis, had that one brief moment, basically with, well, not basically, entirely with Bob Knight's players. That's
Hmm.
the other
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then Kelvin Sampson, whose career he got off to a good start there, and I think we all know now. I knew back then because he had been a good coach at Washington State. He had done some really good things at Oklahoma prior to taking the IU job. I knew he
Right.
was a really good coach, but in the years since, with what he's done at Houston, I mean, his profile is just, he's going to be remembered as a great coach. They had
Yeah.
a guy who could have kept IU relevant nationally and in the Big Ten, absolutely. But he got a little weird with his telephone and got in trouble with the NCAA and that and Indiana again because of the Knight influence was not one of these outlaw programs. Like if
Right.
you were not capable of playing within the lines, they didn't want you. And that's a credit to them at a certain level. But in any event, there's no way Kelvin Sampson was going to survive that, which, frankly, in terms of NCAA scandals, was not
It
the
seems
biggest one I've ever seen.
it seems quaint now almost.
Yeah, absolutely. But nevertheless, it sunk him. So then they hire Crane, who looked like a great choice. Tom Izzotree had already been to a Final Four at Marquette.
Hmm.
And he comes into a program that's gone scorched earth. They've got like zero talent. Gradually, mostly with Indiana kids, builds it back up. They have that great season in 13 where they win the Big Ten in a year where the Big Ten was absolutely loaded. Michigan State was the third best team in the Big Ten that year, and Michigan State was great. That was the year Michigan went to the national title game with Trey Burke and that
Oh
bunch.
yeah, yeah.
And
Hmm.
again, they weren't Big Ten champs either. It was IU. And then IU gets to the Sweet 16, one of only two times in the last 25 years they've been to the second weekend. Think about that.
That's crazy.
Um, and they lost to Syracuse and their zone. Sound familiar? Um, but anyway, I think at the time, to me, I know how I was thinking. It felt like, well, okay, that's a tough loss. It's one they shouldn't have taken. But, this thing's only going to go from here. Tom Crane's got it figured out. And
Yeah,
if you're a good coach with the resources that IU provides you, you can do anything. I mean, that's the bottom line. But somehow, as we talked about, he lost the plot. They weren't bad the rest of his tenure, but they weren't good. They won one more Big Ten title, and it was in 2016, the year MSU had Denzel as a senior. But that was a function of the unbalanced schedule. IU
hmm,
won a scheduling title. Nobody believed they were better or even close to Michigan State that year, but they did win one more Big Ten title under him. Then he went away. Who do they get next? They go out and get Arch Miller, who was as hot a name in coaching as you could find,
yep,
and ended up maybe staying a couple more years at Dayton than people would have expected because they felt he was waiting for the right job. Indiana was the right job. He took it and he never could get them on track. They were the worst sin is not only were they not winning big, but they were really dull to watch.
yeah,
And so then they go into the playbook that you see some of these traditional programs go to when times are tough. They went and brought back one of Bob Knight's guys, Mike Woodson, which was a really weird hire. He'd never coached a day in college. He'd exclusively been an NBA coach, and not a terrible one. He'd had decent, not great success in a couple of head coaching jobs. He was on the staff of the Pistons going to work NBA champions in 2004 as an assistant to Larry Brown. So, I a lot of people took a lot of shots at Mike Woodson during his time at IU, but don't get it confused. Mike Woodson certainly is a very capable basketball mind.
yeah,
He just was the wrong guy for the wrong job at the wrong time. And the death blow was last season when Indiana reportedly went out and spent more money in NIL than anybody else in the country. It was an expensive, talent laden roster. They could only go 500 in the league. They didn't make the NCAA tournament, which he had made his two previous years.
yeah,
He couldn't even do that. And so that was obviously that. And it led to Indiana hiring a guy that, was going to be interesting to see. He's a good coach, Darian DeVries, good coach, has had some success, certainly. There's reason to think he may be able to be successful at Indiana. But interestingly, he's not the kind of name. I mean, he certainly has more credibility than when they hired Woodson. But if you look back at how Arch Miller was viewed when he was hired, how Tom Crane was viewed when he was hired, how Kelvin Sampson was viewed, so the three guys prior to Woodson, how they were viewed when Indiana hired them, they were all seen as hotter names than DeVries.
yeah,
I don't think that's a slight on DeVries. It's just a fact. Um, Crane and Miller in particular were arguably as hot as you could be as a coaching name for a guy who did not yet have a high major job. Um, but that who knows? That may end up working out. It's gonna be interesting. He did just 1 year at West Virginia. He went 19 and 13 and 10 and 10 in the Big 12 with a largely rebuilt roster. They were a team that was somewhat controversially left out of the tournament last year.
hmm,
But decent year, and again, you also have to remember his best player, his son, who's a guy we're going to talk about,
right,
missed the vast majority of the season, so they didn't even have arguably their best player, and they were still okay. You go 500 in the Big 12,
I mean, it's not great. Nobody's going to be doing cartwheels, but it's not a disaster. And then prior to that, which I guess you should speak about since you followed Drake, he had a 6-year run where he was pretty good.
They're very good. Yeah. No, I think this is of the four new Big Ten coaches that we've mentioned many times. Three of the four come from the Drake on some level.
Right.
And so you have Medved,
Yeah.
we've already talked about going to Minnesota, and this is our second one, Darian DeVries, who via West Virginia ends up in Indiana. He was very successful at Drake. I mean, the Missouri Valley, it's the high end of the mid majors, I guess you'd say. And although it's still just a one bid league usually,
Most
and
years. Yeah.
yeah, most years, and he had a lot of success there. And I'm not quite sure what to make of him in some respect, and it's maybe not fair. Now he did make the tournament. Um, well, actually, I don't think he made the tournament with before Tucker was on the team. So I think they were pretty good, but I think they lost the championship, I believe, the year before. They made a couple in a row. So with his son, they're very good. Tucker's a really good player, but I don't think they're able to quite get over the hump. And so on some level, I'm unsure if he's more a result of his son success and his dominance, or if it's just truly just the coaching. Now he's able to identify talent. He got players out of the portal, which you have to do with these mid majors, and so he's got a lot of ability to find talent and put teams together and play well. It'll be interesting to see. I didn't watch any West Virginia basketball last year, so I'm curious to see their numbers. But the one thing at Drake, I felt like they weren't a great defensive team, at least when he was coach. Much different than when Ben McCollum took over after him, and so I felt like they just had to outscore you, which they did a lot of times. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do here. But yeah, I don't know how to think about Darren DeVries specifically, and whether that translates into high major success. And obviously we just wait and find out. But he definitely was very successful at a place that has been very successful of late. And he was the first one to kind of. Medved had some success, but didn't really get to the
It
tournament or
was
anything.
one. It was 1 year.
Yeah, right. So he took over and he sort of moved Drake into where they are, now of some prominence, and now they, Ben McCullum continued to carry that on after him just for 1 year as well. It's just hard sledding at that level. And again, I just don't know would DeVries had been able to watch him for a couple years after Tucker's gone, you'd had a better feel for sort of what
Yeah.
he's like as a coach. But that's a hard thing to ask. Certainly ask him. I mean, he's right to take off as soon as if he's got eyes for other places. You definitely want to take off when you have a chance like that, because you don't get those opportunities very often. I mean, you can see players or coaches who might wait. Dusty May was certainly in that situation. He had a big success at FAU. He waited a year. I mean, his had he waited another year, who knows? He may not have been well sought after. He might have had trouble getting
Or
to it. But he ended up
or
obviously at Michigan,
or he could have this job.
or he could have had this job for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, this
But
definitely could have been one.
but you're absolutely right. There's always a sense of timing with this, and I wondered if he had blown it by
Going
not
to West
by
Virginia.
not
Yeah.
leave. No, well, not DeVries. Talk about Dusty May for a
Oh
second.
yes, yeah, yeah,
By
right.
not going after their Final Four season. Now, as it ended up, he actually had, I think, better options by waiting a year, but he couldn't have known that was what was going
No,
to
yeah,
happen.
no.
He theoretically could have gone. Louisville wanted to hire him. I still don't understand why he didn't take that job over Michigan. I really don't. It's a better job.
Hmm.
Um, but he took Michigan, which is still a very good job. And reportedly, he could have been or was to some degree in the mix at Ohio State, which is also a very good job. So in DeVries' case, it's interesting. So he has a 6-year run at Drake, makes the tournament 3 of his final 4 seasons. His overall winning percentage was 71%, and it's just barely below that in conference play over the 6 years. So, if you win 69% of your games in the Missouri Valley over 6 years, you're a good coach. I
Yeah,
think you make an interesting point about his son. Um, and I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
we'll
That may
see
just be
when
the
we
difference to
see.
being. Yeah, that may just
But
be the difference to being a good like being successful and being very successful, making the
yeah,
NCAA tournament on a regular basis, and that just one player is the one who can,
But
push you over the edge.
I think that clearly he's demonstrated he can coach. The,
Yeah,
the
I
the
think so
issue
too.
here is Indiana isn't just any high major job. This is the
Right.
toughest job in the Big Ten. Also potentially the most rewarding for the same reason. It's you got to look at Indiana the same way you look at a place like Kentucky or Kansas or North Carolina. Except I think it's arguably even tougher than those places because I think basketball is such a huge part of the state of Indiana's DNA that I just think it's another level.
Yeah.
And, this quarter century in the wilderness has not really resulted in a significant lessening of interest. I think there's a hunger among the people in that state to see their flagship school's program get back to consistent high level winning. So the question is, can DeVries be the guy to get them back to that level? And we've got a number of guys who were viewed very, very positively before they took that job who have been unable to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, someone who's gone to the Big Ten tournament a number of times, and my son's in the state now, he's at Purdue. There's still no question that although Purdue has been very successful, it's obviously in Indiana. Indiana is the school in the state of Indiana when it comes to basketball, and that's the expectation, despite having far, far less success over the last quarter century compared to Purdue. So
Well, I think it's very simple. If think about it in terms that we're intimately familiar with in our state, and in football.
yeah, right.
Um, the fact is, as we all know, there's a derisive and scathingly accurate term for the phenomenon, the Walmart Wolverine, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Indiana has their people. Now, from what I understand, the most galling type of person like that in the state of Indiana is the one who's an Indiana basketball fan and a Notre Dame football fan, which to me probably should result in a 20-year prison sentence if you're doing that without a connection to either school.
yeah,
But be that as it may. But that's kind of the phenomenon when you talk about that, how despite the huge disparity in the last couple decades between what Purdue has done and what Indiana has done, it doesn't change that.
yeah.
Changes like that don't happen that quickly. They
Yeah,
take
it's because it's passed down in families, right? Like your
yes.
grandfather went to Indiana, and they're just fanatical about basketball. And again, no slight against Purdue, who's obviously a very good school. It's got a good basketball tradition as well. It's just not the same, and that there's
Right.
no better explanation except to just say that.
Well,
So,
and the big difference, frankly, is Indiana as a school has 5 national titles. Purdue
well,
has
right,
none.
yeah, big
So
difference. Yeah, one is a bunch of engineers. They tend not to be as flamboyant and showy and flashy as the non-engineering schools. So before, I think we'll just talk about the season recap too. We'll just have you go over that real briefly. Brought to you by Nudge Printing, the OG for the sponsors to the Final Four is not the schedule. All our gear that we wear, apparel, is from Nudge Printing. You can also find all our prizes and gifts come from Nudge Printing as well. So if you enter the contest like the Beat Rod contest, where you get to predict the Big Ten schools 1 to 18, send along an email to me, costs nothing, Eric at tffinots.com. Make sure you put in, obviously, the order 1 through 18, but also the amount of points you expect Michigan State to score against Michigan this season as a tiebreaker. You win gift apparel from Nudge Printing or whatever you want. They got all kinds of things there, whether it's Michigan State, other schools. They've got clothing, they've got stickers you can have printed out. Like I've got one, and you can get some stuff from Tiff Nuts as well at nudgeprinting.com or nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS to get our apparel. And the nice thing too is we make an order 20% off if you mention Final Four. Just type it in as one word at checkout. So, we mentioned briefly the kind of a poor season. I don't know if you want to go and expound a little bit more on it or if you want to sort of talk about that more when we talk about the players, but definitely
no,
a season where there's a lot more expected and just nothing really happened with this last year.
yeah, I mean, they spent more money than anybody, and they didn't get very much for it. I think it was two big issues. One was, and we said this in the preseason. I said it. There, they spent all that money, but the way they went about it, the way they decided to assemble that roster, never made any sense to me at all. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand, and we'll talk about um, what they did in terms of adding front court players. What it meant was they brought in one of the highest paid guys in the country to play lazy, uninspired basketball at the five, which then forced their guy who would have been a very good five to play the four and to be dealing with a two post player scenario. They finally figured it out well enough to stop playing them together very much
Yeah.
between Renault and Ballo. And they got better results that way, but it just was never going to work. And then the last domino was that meant that McBacco had to move from his natural spot, which would be a four, to the three. Add on top of all that couple of very, very highly regarded uh, portal additions in the backcourt, both from the West Coast, flamed out. Were nowhere near
Yeah.
what they were supposed to be. So you add all that up, you get a 10-10 season.
Yeah. I think the highlight of the season was coming to East Lansing, beating Michigan State, playing that zone
Yeah.
the whole game and just kind of befuddled MSU. And we don't need to go into
That and
talk about that more.
they also played Purdue tough. But
Yeah, that's true.
beyond that, it was a struggle.
All right. All right. Well, let's talk about the key players departing and key retained players for Indiana going into the 2025-26 season. We'll begin with Blake Renault, who you just mentioned, 6'9" power forward, who had transferred to Miami after playing 3 seasons with Bloomington. He shot 55, 13, and 73. He averaged 13.3 points a game, 5.5 rebounds a game. Good player, and one I think we are always impressed with him. And then, as you mentioned, forced to play out of position a lot of the season, or just in sort of weird situations.
I felt for him because he had proven that he was a really good low post player, and he should have been the next guy who was the focal point of the interior offensive approach for Indiana. And instead, they shoved him to the four and made him play in lineups frequently where you had two low post players operating at the same time. Well, that doesn't really work these days, and it didn't work well for Indiana. So I felt badly for him, the situation he was put in.
And then we come back to the most controversial one, I think, probably the selection. And I think Omar Ballo, who reportedly cost $1 million or million plus or something. He averaged 13 points a game,
$2 million plus,
9.1 rebounds a game, productive. But it's one of those productions that are maybe a little more meaningless. And I feel like he is sort of a reflection of what has happened with the Indiana program in general. And I think it's something of traps that programs can fall into, where you sort of, instead of getting the right player, you worry about making the headline and getting the the flash, or the one who's going to get people the most excited. Just like getting the coach that maybe that everyone's talking about, versus getting the one that's going to work best within,
winning,
it has the best strategy.
Winning the press conference. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I feel like Indiana's been that way, maybe a little bit with coaching. And I think Ballo was sort of that as well. And that you just got a guy who is clearly he was not right for this team, and probably maybe not for any team in some respects. Certainly not. It just didn't work at Indiana and Bloomington.
Well, if he was at a place where he was not as bad at Arizona or at Gonzaga where he had been before,
right?
In terms of his effort. So that was a function of, look, I was hearing this stuff about Mike Woodson's program from year one, that it was inmates running the asylum, and you could not pick, obviously, a worse environment for a kid like Ballo to go to, because pretty clearly, judged by what, evaluated based on what happened in Indiana, it would seem that he's a guy that needs some real structure, and probably somebody, as the kids say, applying belt to ass. And that wasn't happening in Indiana. Now, Mike Woodson, I think, suspended him for a game at one point. I mean, there were attempts, but that stuff, when you're at that point, you're already in trouble.
Yeah.
It should never get to that spot. I just think it was a function of their boosters wanting to flex some muscle and say, okay, who's the biggest name that we can get? And Ballo
Yeah.
was that guy, and they went and bought him, and there was not nearly enough thought given to what, to me, because we were talking about it in the preseason last year, was a pretty obvious issue, which is, yeah, in a vacuum, I can see why he would be somebody that might excite a team, but does he make sense for this team given who else they have? And I thought the answer might not be yes to that he would make sense, and he clearly didn't, and the season demonstrated that. So bad deal all the way around.
Yeah, you proved prescient there, although I think you had them predicted like fourth or fifth in the league because, and they finished much lower, which you said they would
Yeah.
do, even though you predicted the fourth or fifth. I'd have to look back. At least you've been consistent in your Indiana prediction. This is unusual that you're picking the
I'm
middle of the
finally
pack or a little.
picking them fairly low. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's right. And so the final key departing player we'll talk about is Mackenzie Mabako, who you talked about before. 6'7" forward. He's now transferring to Texas A&M. He was pretty productive, also averaged 12.2 points a game, 4.6 rebounds, shot 44, 33, and 81.
Yeah, but you got to remember, Mbako was like a top 10 recruit who was originally committed to Duke. And then, if you remember 2 years ago, they had Kyle Filipowski decide to come back for his sophomore year, which
Right.
then led to Mbako um, switching things up, deciding he decommitted and then ended up in Indiana. And he was pretty good as a freshman. He started slowly, but he started to figure it out. And a lot of that started to happen when they were able to play him some minutes at the four. Well, last year that just didn't happen often enough because of what we've been talking about. And so he's a third guy that was
Right.
it was not as productive as he should have been. His perimeter shooting in particular really declined. He's not a great defensive option having to guard wings. He'd be better off guarding four men. And I think it's fair to say that even though the counting numbers were okay, when you look at his efficiency, it was a little bit of an underachieving season. You would expect a talent at the level he was reputed to be would build on his freshman season, and instead he went backward. But again, not entirely all his fault. And he's going to be at Texas A&M this season. We'll see how it goes.
He heads to A&M as Buzz Williams leaves and heads to Maryland, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
uh,
he signed on for the Buckyball, the new
right.
regime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, yeah, after that, for sure. All right, so that's of course brought to you, but we'll wipe those players away just like you should have your windows cleaned by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. You got some grime on the side of your house or on your windows, contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids if you're in the greater Grand Rapids area. They do fantastic work. As a listener to the show, you get 15% off. You just mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to do that at our support page. The Final Four is on the schedule.com/support, or if you're lazy, tffinots.com/support. Get those windows cleaned now in the fall before you have to sit all winter and stare at the snow and the gray clouds through dirty windows. All right. So then we'll talk about the returning players for Indiana. All right. Well, moving on.
yeah, none. This is and that's a little unusual. Most of the time, an incoming coach, even in the modern era, is able to retain a guy or two.
We're pretty sure the water boy left too. We're not entirely sure about that. We have to
But
didn't do quite enough research, but
this
the managers
is
left.
this is like where Tom Crean started Scorched Earth, except one big difference. Darian DeVries has the portal with which to
Yes.
restock. He's not relying on entirely freshmen.
Right. So one of the players he managed to land is a guy named Tucker DeVries, 6'7", 215-pound senior. I'm not quite sure how I convinced him to come to Indiana. Obviously, he's the coach's son, two-time player of the year in the Missouri Valley. Last year, he was real early in the season. He got injured and was out for the rest of the year. He averaged 15 points a game, 4.9 rebounds a game in 8 games, shot 41, 47, 82. So he's got a lot of size. He's got a lot of ability to hit outside. He can beat you off the dribble. He can rebound pretty well. I mean, he's a 36% shooter from three on high volume throughout his career and was better last year. He's a good player. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he was great for Drake in a number of years. The only knock you could ever say against the guy is that in big games, like in the NCAA tournament, both times he basically fell apart at the end of the game when they had both those games won, and he just wasn't able to perform. But that's about the only thing you can say about him. He otherwise carried the team and played big in like the Missouri championship game, Valley championship game, and so I super impressed by him. Michigan State player fans are going to be they should be worried about him because he's going to cause a lot of trouble as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah, he's been a big time, very, very productive player at both of his previous stops. Of course, the West Virginia one was incredibly brief. Now, I seem to recall last spring when Darian DeVries took the IU job, there was some conspiracy talk that there had actually been contact between Indiana officials and Darren DeVries as early on as December. And there was a question about whether Tucker's injury was truly as bad as they were saying it was,
Oh,
that he
that's
was kind
deep
of
conspiracy.
tanking. Yeah. Who knows? But the bottom line is he's healthy now, and Indiana has an alpha. They've got a number one option, a guy who's done it. He's proven, well put together. Obviously, as you say, career, very solid 3-point shooter, has a scorer's mentality, can help you out on the board some too. So this is the guy you would expect to lead this team in scoring and be their focal point this year. So not a bad place to start.
Well, the next player, if you are somebody who follows Missouri Valley and Drake, you recognize him as well, Connor Enright. He's a 6-1 transfer from DePaul, but he played his previous 2 years, his freshman and sophomore year, with Tucker DeVries at Drake. And last year he averaged 7.5 points a game, 6.2 assists per game to 3.1 turnovers a game. So 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Shot 40, 33, and 63. He's actually a much better free throw shooter, I feel like, his freshman year. But a guy who plays a lot of energy. He sort of reminds, I'm trying to think who he reminds me of. But anyway, he's a good player. He's the one who can make plays, and he's the one who definitely knows his role. And I think it he's going to be a great point guard to have for Indiana. So unlike some of these teams where you don't know if they have a point guard, I think they definitely have one here with Enright.
Yeah, and it's important, you don't count on necessarily as a new coach that usually the issue is all right, in year one with all these new faces, how quickly are they going to grasp what the coaching staff wants, offensively? Well, you shouldn't have those issues with Enright because he's played 2 years for DeVries. So that's a shortcut that should be to Indiana's benefit that they've got him. To me, and you've seen him much more than I have, I would expect he's going to be a guy you don't look to do a lot of scoring, but you're going to expect him to run your offense well, be able to get guys into the offense quickly, and to know his role as sort of a floor leader and distributor first and foremost. He's
Yeah.
also got a reputation as a solid defender as well, so that will help if that translates.
Yeah, and now it comes to me. He reminds me of Aaron Kraft. He's a smaller
Oh
version of
wow,
him,
that good a defender, huh?
but I think just the intensity he plays with and just the energy. I think is very similar to that. I don't know about like as far as talent wise,
Right.
but definitely from the way he plays, it strikes me very much of Aaron
Okay.
Kraft. Like he can drive you kind of crazy if you're point guard, and he can get into your skin. I think a little bit. Moving on then to Tatum Conaway, 6'3" senior transfer from Troy, Sunbelt Player of the Year, where he averaged 14.2 points a game, 4.8 assists per game to 2.7 turnovers. He led the league in steals at almost 3 a game, shot 47, 27, and 66.
Yeah, and so clearly you're talking about a guy that has a scorer's mentality, but he's also almost 5 assists per game. He
Right.
was creating for teammates as well. Now, he wasn't necessarily doing that as efficiently as you'd like, but given that they have Enright, they're not going to have Connor Way be the primary point guard. He can be in a sort of a secondary role. Maybe he ends up playing some backup minutes there as well. Uh, I think the issue is the jump shooting 27% from three,
Right.
not going to get it done. He did shoot better than that. He shot 33% his first year at Troy. That's not great either, but it's better than 27%. So I just think with his experience, And the fact that he can help you in a few different ways, he's very likely a starter. And Indiana has played some games this summer. They did a summer trip. And so we've got a pretty good idea who the anticipated five starters are, and he is one of them.
Next, we have Lamar Wilkerson. He's a 6'6 transfer, a senior from Houston State, two-time All-Conference USA pick. He averaged 20 and a half points a game, 4 rebounds a game, shot 48, 45, and 82.
Yeah, and he was, guys from Sam Houston State, you don't think of as being, hot commodity, but he was something of a hot commodity in the portal. So it was a win that Indiana was able to get him. And obviously the scoring numbers were impressive. Scoring number was impressive, and the efficiency was really impressive. So I guess if you were trying to find somebody else who might be able to push DeVries for leading scoring honors, Wilkerson would be your best bet, because he's a proven shooter from three. He's also good in the mid range. And again, he's a certain starter on the wing, opposite Connor Way.
Well, Indiana has been in the gutter for quite a while. And so if you need help with your gutters, make sure you contact the Brothers Just Your Gutters, whether it's cleaning them out, putting the leaf guards on, or putting those heaters on so you don't have the ice buildup on the side, which can cause all kinds of problems as well. Contact the brothers today, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state. Greg and Kurt can take care of you. They'll give you great pricing. They'll give you great service, and they'll get the job done quickly, which is really, really nice, and really nice guys who work for them too. So head on over to support page at the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. You can find links to get estimates from either Greg or Kurt, depending what side of the state you live on. Remember, you get 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And again, replace, repair, clean out those gutters, whatever you need done, they can take care of the job. So then next player is Reed Bailey, 6'10", 230-pound senior transfer from Davidson, where he averaged 18.8 points a game, 6.1 rebounds a game, 3.8 assists per game. Pretty impressive for a 6'10 player. He shot 48, 42, and 77, but not huge volume on threes.
Yeah, but even so, with Bailey, you're talking about a very skilled big man. And so I think the ball skill aspect you don't worry about. Like, he could shoot, he could pass. You're gonna be able to do some things with him that way. What I wonder about is he going to be able to handle the rigors of the interior in the Big Ten from a physicality point of view? He is 230, so it's not like he's got nothing on his frame, but he hasn't seen anything like what he's going to find in the paint in this league. So that would be the one issue I would think, but he's almost guaranteed to be the starter at the five. The level of production at Davidson is too good to think otherwise.
Then we have Sam Alexis. He's a 6'9", 240-pound senior transfer from Florida, which he wasn't quite as active or involved in in the last year as he was before. He was moved to the bench last year, where he's averaging 4.7 points a game, 3.5 rebounds a game, shot 47, 20, and 54. And I think the 20 probably is an explanation for why he didn't play quite as much. When he was a starter, he was averaging almost 10 rebounds a game. So the previous year, so he's definitely got some ability there. Also, he's a guy shot blocker. So he, 2 blocks a game when he was starting more.
Yeah, and I mentioned with Bailey the concern you would have is how does he hold up physically. The fact that they've also added Alexis is really important because he gives you another option if in a given matchup physicality is proving to be an issue. He's done it for 3 years in the SEC, and as you say, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks per game as a sophomore at Florida when he was a starter. So he's shown he's capable of getting the job done in the paint. Uh, I'm expecting he's going to be a reserve, but I think he's going to play a lot, probably at both the four and the five.
Then we have Josiah Miles. He's a 6'6 junior transfer from North Florida, where he averaged 15.4 points a game and 6.8 rebounds a game, shooting 43, 34, and 63.
Yeah, and he's a long 6'6". Obviously, he was a proven scorer at North Florida at that level. So this is a guy you can figure is going to earn consistent minutes in the rotation. I just don't know if it'll be exclusively on the wing or maybe they'll get some small ball four out of him. But I would expect to see Miles playing consistent minutes.
And then a player whose last name kind of dictates where he used to play, Jason Drake, who played at Drake, 6 foot junior guard, transferred in, obviously from Des Moines, where he averaged 11.1 points a game, 3.1 assists per game to two turnovers a game, shot 43, 40, and 87.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's incorrect. He didn't play at Drake. He
I was
played.
gonna say I
I
saw that
believe
written.
he
I'm like, I
played.
don't remember him last year.
I believe he played at Duquesne, but
Duquesne.
he's a
That I believe
Mich
because I'm like, I don't remember that name. I would have for sure.
he's a Michigan kid. Played his high school basketball at Ferndale. I know I've got that right.
Yeah.
And yeah, decently productive there. I think he's got a real shot to earn back up point guard minutes. And if that 40% shooting from three could translate to the Big Ten level, then you definitely can see him as a consistent rotation guy.
Next, we have Nick Dorn, 6'7" junior transfer from Elon, where he averaged 15.2 points a game, shot 37, 35, and 81. And most of his shots have been outside the arc last year.
Yeah, 75% of his attempts came from deep. So Dorn, you're talking about a catch and shoot three guy. And if he can do that decently, there's probably minutes available for him because there's always a need on almost any team for guys who can come in off the bench and give you some shooting.
Something Indiana's certainly been lacking as far as outside shooting the last
Absolutely.
couple of years, right? I mean, new coaching and
Yeah.
new regime, so things could be different anyway. But then we have Josh Harris, a 6'8", 210-pound sophomore transfer from North Florida as well. He averaged 13.4 points a game, 7.1 rebounds a game, and he shot 56, 33, and 70.
Yeah. And Harris, not a big guy for an interior role, but he was really productive inside at North Florida. And that's largely down to his being athletic and having a high motor. His mentality helped him be productive in that way. Uh, I can see Harris being a reserve that gets minutes inside, but a lot of this, you see, there's a lot of these names coming from lower level
Yeah.
basketball, and you're never quite sure how it's all going to translate. So I think that's what we'll see early on is which of these guys end up coming to the forefront and earning reserve roles. I think their top six, counting Alexis as the top reserve, are pretty much in stone. But from there on, there are a lot of guys who are candidates. We know they're not all going to play significant minutes. So we'll see with Harris, but very productive year as a freshman. So there's some reason for optimism there.
Then we're going to move on to players who are not transferring in, but you have Trent Sisley, 6'8", 215-pound freshman from Santa Claude, Indiana. He's when Michigan State was after, I guess, semi-heavily last season to
Very,
recruit.
very heavily.
Yeah. And so he obviously signed with Woodson, obviously new coach, clearly likes the Hoosiers and just like being in Indiana. So he ended up sticking around and he'll be probably playing more at the four at 6'8", I imagine.
That's what he is. He's in college. He's a four-man. I liked him a lot. I liked him a lot as a high school player. I was disappointed that Michigan State didn't get him. Now I'm very happy with Cam Ward, but Sisley I think is a guy um, who has potential over time to be a good player because he's got good strength and he's demonstrated some real deep shooting ability. So you're talking about a guy that in the long run you figure will be a stretch for you. Um, I think for this year, as I've just mentioned, there's a lot of competition, right? You've got Alexis and Harris at a minimum, and maybe even Miles that he's competing with for reserve minutes. How all that's going to work out remains to be seen. I think there's a chance that Sizer could end up playing some minutes, but I'd probably bet a little more on the veterans at this stage.
Next, we have Alexa Ristic. He's from Europe. He's a 6'5" guard. I think they think he can play on and off the ball. And so I guess we'll see where he is as far as point guards, whether he's a point guard or backup.
Yeah, he's not going to start. I think the competition is with Drake for backup point guard minutes. They really like his potential, supposedly, in pick and roll, which is important. If you can run pick and roll effectively as a point guard, just with the amount of possessions that end up in pick and roll situations, that's a positive. Uh, we just don't know very much about this guy in an American basketball context. So he's a very different player than Drake in the sense that he's 6'5", Drake is six
Right.
feet. So there's a contrast there, but I think that's probably where the competition is.
And finally, a player who must have been missed by Brad Underwood is Andre Esimovic from a 6'11" center from Bosnia.
Yeah, you can't get them all. Uh,
Only got so many scholarships. You
the
can't take everyone
the
from Europe, East Europe.
Yeah, the word on him is that they like his potential as a rebounder and defender, but reading what DeVries said about him and announcing his commitment in late July, and I mean, it was very recently, just about a month ago, that he committed, so a late commitment. It sounds to me like he's not likely to earn a role this season, and they shouldn't need him to. They've got, as we've been saying, they got a number of guys who are capable of playing at the 4 and or the 5 in addition to the starters. So I would expect this to be a developmental year.
Well, it's that wraps up everything for Indiana. We'll just talk about briefly here. This is obviously tricky because not only did you change with the coaching staff, but the entire roster is turned over. You have some idea what with DeVries, maybe Enright if you watch those guys play together, but for the most part, there's a lot of unknowns here. How Indiana's going to play, how they're going to look. I mean, it's really, at least from the numbers and things, they sound like they got some guys who can play and can score. So you expect something from Indiana, which I'm sure why you have them as 12 here. And certainly DeVries is worth a couple standing spots in the standings too, I believe. So what do you make of everything? I mean, how do you predict what this team's going to be?
Well, I think the first thing is trying to figure out, how do you evaluate a team where everybody from the coaches on down is new? That's
Managers.
challenging, right?
Yeah.
If you look at how his teams at Drake played, they tended to be, and you can verify this or not, but from what I've seen, they're kind of a middling to slower paced offensive team, but they were usually reasonably efficient. They weren't like elite, but they were pretty decent
Yeah.
in that area. Not a ton of turnovers. Um, as you talked about, statistically, they were not very good defensively until his last couple of seasons when they managed to get into the top 70, which, for a Missouri Valley team is not terrible. For a
Mm-hmm.
Big Ten team, it would be very mediocre. But so I would say defense is where you'd expect the holes to be early on. In his time at Drake, he was mostly played man defense, right?
Yes.
That's what I've gathered in looking into him a little more deeply. He's a pack line guy. So pack line is nominally man defense, but functionally it can play a lot like a zone does in the sense that defenders are trying to keep 1 foot in the paint, touching the paint. That's the goal. That's the idea. So by saying pack line, what you're doing is you're packing the lane, which is supposed to make twos much more difficult to generate and to convert. It also can mean you're vulnerable with threes. We've
Right.
seen it in this league. I think Wisconsin, the guy in recent years who was most prominent in playing pack line defense was Tony Bennett at Virginia. So if you think about what his teams look like, you get an idea. But Wisconsin has utilized some of those principles. Frankly, at times, Michigan State has as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not to this extent, but you get the idea. You're basically saying we're going to make twos very, very tough on you. You may be able to get some 3-point attempts off, but you're not going to get twos easily. But again, if you're playing a team that can hit the three, that can be a problem.
Right.
Uh, as seems to be required for Big Ten coaches in the preseason, he's talked about playing a more up tempo style offensively. But I'm going to need to see that to believe it because if you look at his track record, that just has not happened with his teams. Now,
I agree.
maybe the argument is, well, he's got different players now, and so this is how he always wanted to play. He just wasn't able to. I don't buy that.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm with you.
I think if obviously, as we've talked about, his son is a good place to start to build his program because Tucker's been a high level talent. He's been a conference player of the year type guy. That's a great place to start. And his portal group is pretty solid, I think. Wilkerson, as I mentioned, is a guy a lot of high major programs were interested in. He was a big time scorer and was efficient in scoring as well. That could be a pretty good guy, pretty good candidate to have as your Robin to DeVries Batman. Connerway was a conference player of the year. Bailey put up really good numbers in the A10. And as we talked about, Enright has experience playing point guard for this coaching staff. So that starting five looks pretty solid, and then you add a proven high major guy like Alexis. And then from there you go to a bunch of guys coming up from the mid-major level who are at least intriguing and were productive at that level. How much of that translates, we'll see. But I don't think you have to squint very hard to see a solid rotation emerging. But
Yep.
that doesn't mean there aren't question marks. If you look at this roster, there's not a lot of size. Alexis is really it in terms of rim protection and a guy who has the potential to be a high level rebounder. I'm not going to be surprised if they struggle on the interior at times this year. And as we've talked about, as is true with so many teams these days, there's not a ton of cohesion. They've actually got a decent starting point in that the point guard and arguably the best player have a lot of experience playing for the staff. But beyond those two guys, you have all the same coherency issues that you have with any program that's overturning a roster. And where I think that's going to be problematic is not so much offensively, because again, having Enright should help, but
Yeah.
it probably is going to show up on the defensive end. As you look at how long it took for his Drake teams to get to even be, decent to good defensively. It took 4 years, you know. So I think rebounding and defense would be my areas of concern primarily for this team coming into the season. I think they've got a chance to be a tournament team. I certainly would not rule that out at all. But I personally, when you're talking about a number of teams, as we are in the Big Ten, that kind of all seem to have a lot of questions and a lot of potential, and you're kind of grading that out, I think a
Yeah.
program that's starting from scratch, I'm thinking they're probably going to be just enough bumps to put them at the lower end of that Big Ten middle class that's very large.
Yeah. It'll be interesting as well to know how much, assuming that you're right, and the Indiana finishes 12th, maybe their bubble team, whatever, they'd be probably right around there or something.
Yeah,
How much
I'm
patience?
figuring they're going to be in the discussion like mid-February.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if they're not still alive.
But like, how much patience there will be for DeVries if, like, let's say they have this year, and this is projecting a ways away, but unless he changes a lot, like, let's say they're middling this next year, and then he loses DeVries, what happens then if they have another sort of
Well,
middling?
I
That's,
will
you don't have a
I
lot
will
of, you don't
tell
have a
you
big long
this.
leash, right?
You don't. You're right about that. But I don't think he intends to have this be Brad Underwood East. Um, Indiana has been very active in high school recruiting and high level high school
And they
recruiting.
have a lot of spots too, because most of the people are senior transfers coming
They
in.
will. And this is not a guy. I mean, I don't know for sure how it's going to go. They've already got one commit, a kid that Michigan State had some interest in from Virginia, Prince Moody Alexander, who's a big point guard. Not an elite talent, but a solid top 100 guy. And they're expected to get more, and they're in the mix for some very high level players. So my assumption from what I've seen is that he's going to end up with a pretty highly regarded incoming high school class for next year, which is interesting because he has not been like a dynamite high school recruiter. Look at the places he was. He was at Drake all those years. He didn't have a
You
chance to get
can't.
anything going at West
Yeah.
Virginia. So we didn't really know anything about him. I tend to think this because you would know better than I, but my impression of Darian DeVries is that you're not talking about the most dynamic personality in the world, right? Pretty
No.
low key guy, like
not a guy you can envision setting living rooms in America on fire when he's making recruiting pitches. So to me, now he may have a good staff in place that's helping with that, but my guess is that Indiana and the resources the program offers is playing a role
Sure.
in their high school recruiting because they're not it's not dominated by in-state kids as of yet because there's not a ton of in-state talent this year from Indiana. So he's got to go further afield, but he seems to be being received very well, which again, I tend to think is speaking more about the program than it is about him
Yeah.
individually.
No,
But
I think you're right.
regardless, it's a good place to start. That's what I would advise that he do, and it looks like that's exactly what he is going to do, which is have a decent sized, strong high school class. So next year, regardless of what happens with this group, that you're giving that fan base reason to be optimistic. And I expect they'll be active and probably reasonably effective in the portal again. And so he'll probably have a decent amount of talent again next year, even if it doesn't all pan out this year. Uh, but hopefully for him, from his perspective, he'll be one step further to kind of establishing the core of what he wants this program to actually be.
Right. And he'll
But
have the
but
resources to retain it too.
but
One
you
would
are
expect.
not wrong in highlighting the, forget what have you done for me lately. It's like, what have you done for me 2 minutes ago?
Right.
That's the
Yes.
nature of things everywhere, but especially a place like Indiana now.
Yeah.
They're so hungry for success. And, my sense from afar is that there's reasonable optimism about him, but this is not where they were as a fan base when they hired Arch Miller or where they hired Tom Crane, where I think they really all believed we're getting a world beater.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
there's more
This
muted
feels like a Woodson hire
enthusiasm.
in some
It's a
respects.
it's a better hire than Woodson because at least this guy has coached and been successful in
But as
college.
far as enthusiasm, I think you're right.
Yes. The only difference there would be there was, I think, an element of the Indiana fan base, although probably dwindling, that loved the idea of one of their guys
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
coming back, which DeVries is not. But yeah, it's kind of, I think there's optimism, but I think it's more muted than we've seen in the past. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think they got a chance to wrap it up. I mean, I think they got a chance to be a tournament team. I just wouldn't bet heavily on it yet. I got to see more to be convinced
Yeah.
of that.
I agree. Yeah, and as far as recruiting standpoint, his ability to recruit at Drake is so limited, and
You can't judge somebody by that.
the talent pool in Iowa is not great anyway. And if anyone who's pretty decent ends up at Iowa or Iowa State, generally
Right.
Iowa. So
The,
he
the
had a couple
only
players.
the only thing I would say is, and it's the same thing, we're going to be talking soon about Ben McCollum, and I think it would, in at least a roughly similar way, apply to DeVries. The nice thing is, you are talking about a guy who's had to do it at places where recruiting's not easy.
Right.
I don't know where does Drake fit in the Missouri Valley, like in terms of resources and facilities? Do you have a sense?
I don't, but my sense is it must be decent now because they've been so good for like
Well, I'm
almost
just
eight,
wondering if
9 years. I
I
don't think
was
they have huge resources. It's a pretty
so
small
he doesn't
school.
he probably wasn't operating with advantages relative to his
I
peers.
do I do not believe so. I mean,
Okay.
I can't speak with any certainty, but that's just my impression.
So then, the indications would be solid that while he's a good talent identifying guy, he
Yep.
can spot a player or how a guy's going to function in his system at least. That's a positive. And if you combine that, a good eye with resources that Indiana provides you, maybe this will end up working out well from a talent acquisition standpoint, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. Proofs in the pudding, as they say.
Yep.
All right, we'll wrap it up there and we'll be back for the number 11 team and Rod's list in just a little bit. So until next time, the Final Four is now on the schedule. Go green.